Hi, this is Lance Falk, and you are listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome back for another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that takes a behind-the-scenes look at 50 years of monsters, mysteries, and meddling kids through commentary and conversation. I'm your host, Mike Josick. Thanks for joining me. So, for anybody who's a regular listener of the show, you may have noticed that this one's been a little while coming. I'd originally intended to do a bi-weekly schedule throughout the summer. I was wanting to get 2 episodes per month out, and it just kind of backfired on me. And as it turns out, for what is essentially the last couple of months, there hasn't been a new episode. And I kind of left you guys hanging with a bit of a cliffhanger, I guess, with Charles Howell's interview being part 1 of 2. Part 2 just never came out when promised. So I apologize. My deepest apologies to anybody who has been waiting. If you're a listener in the far-flung future, this probably isn't affecting you, and you can maybe skip ahead 30 seconds or so. But I just wanted to let the regular listeners know that summer has kind of kicked me right in the behind, and there's been a lot of scheduling problems and timing problems with getting this podcast and my other podcast out, actually, in fact. So, just not been a good summer for podcasting in general. However, fret not, for part 2 looms on the horizon. If you're listening to this right now, the second part of the interview is coming up in just a couple short minutes. And I'm actually really excited getting this part of the interview out there. It's we have a great conversation. We talk about the Scooby franchise. We talk about Charles's time working on Pinky and the Brain and working under Steven Spielberg on those shows, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain. And I should also point out that there's a bit of an unconventional sort of outro to the episode. I had no more questions, and we were going to shut down the conversation, and it just sort of kept going for a bit. So it just kind of, it keeps going until it's not going anymore. And it's kind of different from how I usually end off the episodes, particularly a second part of the episode. So if you get there and you're kind of wondering, oh, it just sort of ends, that's pretty much how it goes. We did talk for some time after the interview proper ends, but it was a lot of stuff that, just doesn't make the cut. Stuff that is logistical, stuff that's kind of all over the place. And I don't know, maybe one day if I do a Patreon, there will be like the additional bonus content, the stuff that nobody gets to hear. I'll maybe put some of that up, but that's in the future, and I'm not thinking about that right now. So there you go. So I don't really have anything else. I see no point in keeping you guys stuck in this intro any longer. So without further ado, you guys have waited long enough. Here is the second part of my wonderful conversation with Scooby-Doo writer and briefly animator, Charles M. Howell. We'll see you on the other side.
All right, shadow creature, you're dealing with Scrappy-Doo now. Prepare to splat! Ah!
I know a lot of people don't like Scrappy. I kind of feel like once you took away like Fred, Velma, and Daphne, and it was just Shaggy, Scoob, and Scrappy, and it lost sort of all that stuff that made the show Scooby-Doo, like the mystery and the friendship and the
way within the van and everything, and going around and solving those things. By the time I came back, we were back to that. And I think all 4 of the kids were there when I came back.
I think it was just, I don't think Fred and Velma were there.
Maybe it's just Daphne, and I know there was one point where Velma would just appear as a guest star, for instance, in an, or even Daphne or whatever. So we were doing sort of, it kind of changed every year, honestly. But yeah, Scrappy was around. Then we did the version that had Flim Flam, the kid, in
it. 13 Ghosts.
Yeah, and the network wanted the Indiana Jones film that had a kid in it had just come out, and the network said, "Oh, let's have a kid like that in this thing." We got a letter from a kid. You'd get this fan mail, and one kid wrote in and said, "Flim Flam is a waste of crayons," which I always liked that as a description. And I think I wrote one 13 Ghosts, or I wrote one and rewrote one. For somebody else, and it was fun in its way.
I will defend Scrappy, but Flim Flam, I just leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
What was like you said? I know he was imposed on the production, and I know that I think Tom might have actually even apologized for Flim Flam in a roundabout sort of way at one point.
We were all, the network wanted this, and it was developed, and we were all like, what are some possible names for this character, and all that kind of stuff. And Tom was the one who put it together. And what did you ask me? You just asked me something.
I don't think I actually posed an actual question, but a question I would ask is, since it's something that's imposed and you're like, the network wants it, and if the network wants it, it has to be in there, do you try to write for the character? Do you try to make the character something that you embrace? Or
Absolutely.
You just kind of like relegate them to the corners of the story whenever possible?
You can't do that. You can't do it because it'd be really lousy. No, you have to make it real. I remember one day Tom and I were looking at some freelance script that was just horrible that had come in. And my assessment was, what I said to Tom was, this writer never lived in this script. Because that's what it is. That's what you have to do with anything you're writing for. You have to live in that script because it's got a consistent reality. It's got its own, it's got its world and how the characters relate. There's no formula in terms of that. Of course, there's a certain, they're going to find the bad guy at the end and maybe pull the mask off the, whatever it is. But there's no formula for writing an entertaining script. You have to be part of it. You have to be in there when you're writing it.
Do you have fond memories of Flim Flam, or is that?
I think I only wrote one episode with him.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of memories of him. I remember that we kind of, said, oh boy, we got to do this, I don't think anybody was really happy about adding him, but once you add him, he's a character like any other character, and you do it.
When Scrappy was introduced, everything that I've read, essentially, it was like a do or die situation. Either you figure out a way to make this character work, and that's the show the network wants to buy, or they will go with another pilot. I was wondering, with 13 Ghosts, obviously the kind of more traditional Scooby format had sort of run its course. Was this another do or die situation, or was this just a choosing to go in a new direction?
I honestly don't remember. I was not involved in developing that by the time, Tom was.
It's a question for Tom then, yeah.
Yeah, but all of these were things, the network wanted something new all the time. But they also liked Scooby-Doo, which was very successful for them. Until The Simpsons came along. Scooby-Doo, in its various forms, was the longest-running animated show constantly in production in history. It went, 15 seasons, almost 20 seasons, I think.
Even when the show wasn't in production, reruns were still airing weekly somewhere on a network. So, yeah, it had I think it was in the Guinness Book of World Records until The Simpsons.
Yeah. And The Smurfs was their next juggernaut, and that was an hour and a half every Saturday by the end. I think maybe they even went to 2 hours. But that was the next thing that became their huge franchise. But Scooby-Doo. No, Scooby-Doo was a steamroller.
I was young enough at the time that ratings and stuff were not something I paid attention to. It was just you either liked the show or you didn't like the show. And then when you're like 20, 30s on and you're looking back and trying to put yourself in the headspace of what the reaction to the show was like at the time compared to what's kind of floating around in the popular consciousness now, like the Scrappy thing. Like Scrappy was popular back then.
I guess he was.
Well, I hear he's popular from other people who've worked on it.
I liked writing for him. He was a little guy who would charge in and say, "I know how to fix this," and he would go and do something. He was energetic in a way that Shaggy and Scooby, it was always about their fear, and they wanted food, and they, and then like Velma or somebody would say, well, and she'd draw a little chart, and this is how he did this, whatever, and they figured out that way. Shaggy and Scooby weren't really figurers. They were reacting to whatever the ghost or whatever was, and Scrappy would charge in and solve things. So he was useful in that way. A lot of people made derogatory comments about him at the studio, and you don't want to be saddled with something based on network.
Yeah.
But I liked working with him in most of those cartoons because he did have a different personality. He did add something to the show.
Well, he was diametrically opposed to the Shaggy and Scooby dynamic.
Right.
So it created that push and pull there, yeah.
A lot of times when you write a show with multiple characters, you are saying, well, I got to give a line to this person, I got to give a line to that person. You end up splitting up exposition or something by giving a little piece to everybody. You never had to do that on Scooby because they did have different personalities, except maybe for Freddie and Daphne, who were just sort of... I don't think I wrote for them very much. I don't remember.
Well, yeah, like I said, I don't think Fred and Velma were in most of the shows that you wrote, other than A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, which you did.
Velma, I think we saw more of Velma, I think. But, yeah, I don't think I wrote much for Freddie.
So you didn't have much to do with 13 Ghosts.
I wrote one and rewrote another.
Right. But then the next Scooby that you did after that was A Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Where you wrote the pilot. I
don't remember. I remember, is that A Bicycle Built for Boo?
Yeah, that's the introductory episode for the series.
Yeah. I did work on that one with Tom, and it was fun. There was a whole sort of fad at that time for doing kid versions.
The Muppet Babies, the Flintstone Kids, yeah.
Kids, all that stuff. And so this was a way for them to keep the network interested in Scooby. But yeah, and they were more neighborhood mysteries. One of the network kind of thinking points always was that people want to see characters like themselves. So if you're kids, they want to see kid characters. On Pinky and the Brain, the network kept wanting to have them like married with kids. Living next to each other like the Flintstones, Barney Rubble. And we hated that. And Peter Hastings, I don't know why we're talking about Pinky and the Brain, but
that's fine.
He did a couple of scripts trying to address those issues without giving in. They had a kid, it was an episode like The Fly, where Pinky clips his toenails and it lands in a thing, and he's like transferring, and they get I think Brain is trying to clone himself, but Pinky's toenail clippings are in there, and so they get a character who's sort of a cross of both of them. That was as far as Peter would go with making a child. Like, okay, they want a child, I'm doing this. So, you are fighting this stuff sometimes. But they did, the networks like there to be kids and, young adults in the workplace, watch workplace comedy. I mean, they always have this stuff, which means sometimes that a perfectly good show gets taken off the air or something like I think Pinky and the Brain did eventually, because they said, well, who's watching this? What, are adults going to watch it or whatever? And they put us on opposite 60 Minutes. And we said, well, my God, that's our audience. You put us on opposite some terrible show. But anyway, so you're always kind of dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Before we recorded, we talked a little bit about how some of the period that you wrote for the show is regarded by some fans as kind of the dark period for the franchise. But A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, there's a whole generation of kids that are, in their 20s and 30s now, and that was huge for them. They loved that show.
There was a lot of energy put into, Tom developed it with an artist named Mitch Shower, who did new models, for the kid characters, kid versions. And Mitch is great, and I think the show visually had a lot more energy, and the scripts were more fun. I think because it had gotten kind of sluggish, and like I was talking to you about some of the timing from those directors, and this was a point at which new people were coming in and doing that stuff. So I think there was a kind of a resurgence of energy in the Scooby-Doo franchise and some of the other things at Hanna-Barbera at that point in the when was that, 87, 88, somewhere in there?
Yeah, somewhere in there. So there was a new kind of buzz, a new energy surrounding that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was nice to hear that even Ewo said that, with the exception of the original '69 version,
right,
that Pup Named Scooby-Doo is like his next favorite. That's the next official approved Ewo version of the show.
I understand why he would say that. My only feeling about that is that they were basically restricted to neighborhood mysteries.
Yeah.
So you lost some of the scope of, the haunted houses and all that stuff were reduced. Everything was on a smaller scale, not just the characters, but everything was sort of scaled down. But I think it was a good show with all that.
Were there any directives writing Pup? I mean, they're kind of blazing a new trail, but you'd already worked with Tom before many times, so was there did you could intuit like what was needed, like it was an easy show to write for?
Pretty much. I mean, it was, the network wanted neighborhood mysteries, and I think that's how it was sold. I think, with the kids in the neighborhood doing these things. And I don't really know where the development came in. I know that Tom did the development and Mitch, but I don't know how much of that was based on a network suggestion or how much was Tom and Mitch trying to come up with something that, would keep the franchise alive.
When did you come in on that show?
Pup Named Scooby-Doo?
Yeah. Was that like after development and they were hiring writers, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was still working on Snorks or something while that was being developed and sold.
Okay.
And then Tom asked me to come in and write the script. So I was not involved in the development, even though I wrote one or two of those early scripts.
And that was the last Scooby show you worked on, correct?
I think so, yeah. The franchise kind of died until Warner Brothers brought it back, sometime, I don't know, in the 90s. They started doing direct-to-video movies and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like 98, 99 or something like that. Zombie Island comes out, yeah.
Yeah, there was sort of about, I don't know, almost 10 years probably when there wasn't any Scooby-Doo being done.
Fair enough. So that was, you didn't leave the show necessarily. It was just Pup got canceled and you moved on to other things?
Well, you were on staff, and so you were always being switched around from this to that. I think somewhere around that time I did the Judy Jetson TV movie.
Right.
And,
I saw you worked on Johnny Quest.
I did. I wrote a Johnny Quest, and that, again, was between seasons of other stuff. And I loved, that was fun, because that's a show that I was on when I was even younger, that I was probably 10 when Johnny Quest went on the air. And so that was really fun to do that.
It's been funny, because as I've been talking to people who've worked on Scooby, probably 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, if you're ever doing a show on Johnny Quest, give me a call, because I'll be a part of that.
And I got to wrote that. I wrote a Jetsons episode, a half-hour Jetsons episode when they brought that back in the late 80s. And then after I left Hanna-Barbera, I wrote a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the first that show. I enjoyed all those experiences, and I always felt that, I'm not really an action writer. So I wrote the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that introduced the girl turtle, Mona Lisa, and had kind of a romantic angle with, I guess, Raphael, and Johnny Quest one, it was a big ape, Vikong, who had frozen somewhere and they woke him up, which had kind of a tender thing. I tried to do it like Frankenstein, where you understand the monster's point of view. Joe wanted a lot of that thrown out. He said, no, he's just a monster. He's just and he scares everybody. And I tried to put in some stuff where, we cared a little bit about him.
I find that there's a little push and pull with Quest fans and Quest creators, where there's the people who they do want to kind of get into the emotion of it, and they do want a little bit of human drama, and then there are the people who just want they want the action and the explosions and the swinging from things and the kicking and the punching.
You don't care about the action and explosions if you don't have some, I think, if you don't have some relationship to the characters.
Exactly, yeah.
That's why those first 2 Frankenstein movies, which, Bride of Frankenstein is incredible. That's why those are so, have lasted so long, because you really do care about them.
So if you had to pick an iteration of Scooby, either one you've worked on or just one that you enjoy watching, what would you pick as a favorite?
I would pick the classic Scooby-Doo, the 4 kids in the mystery van going around with, stumbling onto a new thing, a villain with a rubber mask. I mean, I thought that was, I liked that when it first came on, when I was a kid. And I thought that's kind of the classic Scooby. It was a great formula. I mean, I can understand why at some point they said, well, we got to do how many rubber masks, how many haunted houses. We got to do something else. And so they expanded it and so on. Long before I ever got there, they'd been doing all these things. They did the Scooby-Doo movies where they had, famous guest stars like Sonny and Cher would be on Scooby-Doo or something, and the Harlem Globetrotters or whatever. That was one that I never quite got into. But no, I think the classic Scooby was the one that I would choose.
And was there a favorite character that you had to write for?
In Scooby?
Yeah.
Well, Scooby and Shaggy. I mean, I think they're sort of like one character. They work together so closely. It was fun to write Shaggy, and Scooby's right there with him. So those were the ones who were fun to write. I mean, I can sort of see why Freddie and Daphne were jettisoned at some point. Although there's something missing from a show like that if you don't have the straight man, if you don't have those kind of characters around. Velma had a little bit more of her own thing that she did.
I think it was a lack of imagination that had those characters jettisoned ultimately.
Lack of imagination on the part of
like whoever said, "Oh, these characters aren't needed. It's just the jokes that are funny, and that's what people are watching."
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Which might have been a network dictate. I don't know, but
I'm sure that had to do with it.
It sounds like a network thing.
Yeah, long before I was there, but those were like 10-minute episodes. Those were shorts, right?
Yeah, eventually it was 3 7-minute vignettes that were just pratfalls and jokes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a waste.
And then they started introducing all the different Doo family and
Shaggy Rogers family, and we were always having relatives of Shaggy Rogers. But all those characters had their fans. I don't know if this is appropriate or not to tell, but why not? I went to Thanksgiving, a big Thanksgiving that some friends were doing a few years ago. And there was this lesbian couple there. And one of the great couple. And one of them said to me that because she heard that I wrote Scooby-Doo. And she said, "Oh, I had such a crush on, can you guess what character I had a crush on?" I said, "I don't know, Daphne?" I figured, she's she said, "No, Velma. I had such a crush on Velma when I was growing up." And, and she knew everything. She knew her last name is Dinkley, Velma Dinkley. And, she knew like everything. And so, but all the characters had their fans, I think.
Now, you've kept working in animation. Did you continue following animation as a fan?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's so much of it now. I don't see everything. But, yeah, I still love stuff that's out there and pay attention to it.
Have you checked in with Scooby in the last little while?
I haven't. I think aren't they still doing this things where it's real ghosts and monsters?
No. The last iteration was Be Cool Scooby-Doo, which played up the comedy more. And
so you're talking about the latest iteration of the series?
Yes, yeah.
For a while they just did the direct-to-video movies and so on.
Yeah, they still do one of those a year.
Yeah. They
experiment with the TV shows. The TV shows, they try different formats, they try different takes. They had Mystery Incorporated, which was more of like it was kind of like Scooby meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Twin Peaks.
Yeah. And
then Be Cool Scooby-Doo was a little bit more...
And, of course, the live-action versions of Scooby-Doo.
Yes, yeah.
So there's that, too.
And there's a new one in development right now as well. So
another live-action one?
Live-action, there's a Daphne and Velma movie coming out.
Oh, my God.
And there's a new TV series coming out.
Yeah, it's an indestructible property. I mean, you really can't... I mean,
And they just crossed over with Supernatural.
You'd think that if you tried to think about what are the great Hanna-Barbera properties, you'd say, oh, well, the Flintstones. But Scooby-Doo has had more iterations and has had a longer life. There were new versions of the Flintstones done in the 70s and so on, and Flintstone Kids, as you mentioned. But really, Scooby has been the franchise for Hanna-Barbera, now Warner Brothers, that really has been indestructible.
That's a perfect segue into the last question that I ask everybody, which is, what do you think is the reason this show endures? Why do you think it is indestructible? What do people respond to?
it's just a great combination of elements. I mean, you've got Scooby and Shaggy and their relationship, and it's very funny. They're funny characters to write for. You've got the mystery, in every episode or in most iterations. So there's just a lot to get involved with. Other characters, other franchises just don't have that much going on in them. I mean, they have a lot going on, but they don't have that many kind of elements that all end up pulling. Each element ends up pulling the other elements in a different direction. It's a very active premise for a show.
I'm always fascinated. I mean, people are always clamoring, I want something new, I want something new. But as soon as you start tweaking something like Scooby-Doo, they rebel. And people want that comfort. They want those 5 characters, and they want those roles that they play, and they want the mystery, and they want...
Yeah. Usually the pressure to do something new comes from the network. They want something that they can promote, and so that people don't feel that they're watching, reruns. They want a new element in it, all the time. And so, but no, fans will say, I hate Flim Flam, or I don't like Scrappy. Scrappy is a character that I enjoyed writing for. But yeah.
I find it interesting you said earlier, the network was like, pulling off rubber masks. How many rubber masks can we pull off? And I'm thinking, they're still pulling rubber masks off today, so...
Absolutely. I mean, it's, everybody likes a haunted house, and everybody likes all of those things. You are looking for new stories to do with them all the time. I mean, we were. So so it does get to that point. I remember when I started on Scooby-Doo, I was handed this thing that was, 200 pages or something, with a list of all the sort of log lines, really, or 2 or 3 sentence descriptions of every episode that had been done. It was hundreds of them, and I was handed this thing and said, "Don't do any of these," So I had to do whatever I could to acquaint myself with what was in there. I remember I taped the show whenever it was on. I had my VCR all set up to tape the show, because it was something to really get into. I remember one summer, it was very hot, and it was the first time when I was really writing for Scooby regularly. I was walking around my apartment talking to myself, Scooby and Shaggy, and the front door was open because it was so hot. There was no air conditioning in that building. And I'm walking around talking to myself, Scooby, and oh my gosh, Scooby, you're doing all this stuff trying to come up with. And there was a guy standing. There was a neighbor from another one of the apartments. They all opened to the outside, walking by, and he was just staring at me. And he said, "Do you walk around your apartment talking to yourself like this all the time?" And I said, "Yeah, and if it's funny, I write it down and I get paid for it." It's like, but he thought it was very strange, and I guess it is strange in a way. But I still walk around the house talking to myself as the characters. That's part of living the script.
So, is there anything that you're working on right now that you want to put out there?
No, I've been doing some acting lately. It's been my longtime writing partner, Gordon Bresack. He's been doing some other things. So, no, I haven't been doing a lot of writing. We wrote on Word Girl, which we had a lot of fun on. That's a wacky show for PBS. We wrote on Octonauts, which is a very kind of slow-moving little kids kind of show, which they said to us, "Oh, you wrote Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. We want that kind of nutty humor on Octonauts." And then they didn't want anything. They it's for 5-year-olds, and they said, "Oh no, you can't have a pratfall because that scares children." And anything you would do, you can't have verbal jokes because you're going to translate it. Or I don't know. But we wrote on both those shows, and they were both enjoyable to work on, especially Word Girl. And I haven't done any writing. Well, I worked on 7D for Tom Ruger. That's the new iteration of the Seven Dwarfs at Disney. So I did that. And other than that, I've been acting a lot around town, doing theater, doing Shakespeare and stuff. I've played Polonius in 2 different productions of Hamlet. I love Polonius. He's a great character. So you keep yourself going. You keep exploring new things. I mean, that's part of it. It was animation, it was storyboards, it was writing, and it's just always great. It's all storytelling.
Yeah.
And if you're playing a character or whatever, it's all sort of different approaches to the same art, all these different crafts that you learn how to do. And
was the acting something that's been kind of in you for a long time, or is it something that just sort of started developing?
I hadn't acted since since high school. And about 10 years ago now, Gordon wrote a play that he wanted to produce here in LA, and I read it. We both read each other's stuff. There was a part in it that was a little featured comedy part, a gay character, and he was casting. He put out a casting call and all that stuff, and he called me up one day and he said, "Charlie, you will never guess, there are no gay actors in Hollywood." And I said, "Well, really? What?" He had this part. This character is a featured comedy part, a character who does a speech from a Betty Davis movie. And it's a different generation is what it really is. People today are younger and don't know those old films and stuff. Anyway, he said, I want you to play this part. And I said, I'm not an actor. And he said, you when we're pitching shows or when we're writing, you're playing all the characters' parts and everything. You can do this. You absolutely can do this. And I held off, but then he insisted. And so I played that character, and then you get the bug. It was fun, and it was very stressful because I'd never done something like that before. And somebody in the cast suggested that we were talking about some aspect of it. She said, "Oh, that's like the Meisner technique," which I didn't know who Sanford Meisner was. And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, you've got to go to a Meisner class." And so she took me to one, and then anyway, I just kept going. So I took 2 years of. I was in over my head when I did that first play, I think. And then I took 2 years of Meisner, and then I went back in and auditioned mostly for Shakespeare and stuff. Classic theater. I played Alfred Doolittle in a production of Pygmalion. I've enjoyed it.
That's the important thing.
Part of the same thing, though. It's all part of the same thing with different crafts. Every craft within this business has its own difficulties, its own sort of mindset you have to get into. You have to do a sort of different approach to all of them. I love this business. I've never had a job outside of show business.
Really?
I've never waited tables. I never did anything because I started at Hanna-Barbera.
Right. You said your sophomore year, right?
Yeah. My freshman year, I had the closest thing to a job outside of show business. I guess it was a job. I was a projectionist at Cal Arts in the school theater. That's the closest thing to like a civilian job.
That's a student job, yeah.
It's a student job, yeah. And I needed the money. And so I did that. And then the next year I was at Hanna-Barbera, and my mom's a school teacher, or was. She's retired now. But there was a point when I was working at Hanna-Barbera, I think maybe I was animating at that point, where I realized this 4 months during the summer where I'm working here, I'm making more than my mother makes in an entire year of teaching. And so, and that's the truth, as horrible as that is. But yeah.
I like what you say about the storytelling, because that's something that I realized for myself a few years ago. Like, everything that I consume and everything that I produce, like the core of it is always some sort of storytelling, whether it's music or writing or doing something like this. I mean, this is all.
This is storytelling too. Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. It's and if that's what your natural rhythm is, you're going to keep doing that in some form or another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have for you.
Oh, well, that's fine. I've rambled off.
No, it was perfect. So this has been great. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining me on the podcast. The stories were great, and you gave us a cool little look behind the scenes of this show we all enjoy and adore.
Yeah. So good luck with all this. How many episodes have you done of this podcast?
I'm not even sure. I think I've got somewhere between 13 and 16.
Wow.
I do it monthly. I'm hoping if I do this for long enough, one of the things I'm finding the most interesting is there's a canonical history of Scooby-Doo. Like Fred Silverman takes credit for, I heard Frank Sinatra on the plane, and I got off the plane and I said, he's going to be Scooby-Doo. But then
I had heard that was Joe.
But then I've heard it's Joe, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's different kind of versions of the stories.
Fred Silverman he was a great guy to work for. Gordon and I developed a show for him at Hanna-Barbera. It didn't sell, but he was just great to work with. He's another one of these executives who doesn't micromanage, and has some thoughts about what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
But Steven Spielberg micromanaged the least of anyone I've ever worked with, and his shows, the shows that I did for him, are probably the best. He would say, that's really funny, or he'd say, let's not do any more cartoons like this, or whatever, if there was something he didn't like. But he didn't sit on top of you with every line you were writing.
I was so surprised to learn that he actually was involved with the show. Like, I thought, I knew he was a fan of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and I thought he, so often an executive producer title is just the title.
It's domain, it's like, but that's not true with this. He
was
involved. He came to the studio and,
And he like demanded that there be an orchestral score for every episode. And
I think that was certainly the first date. Was Simpsons already going at that point?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they would have an orchestral score. But nobody else had ever in television animation.
Because the money, yeah.
Because of the money. And he insisted on that. He insisted on full animation. I think Pinky and the Brain was maybe the last show that was done on painted cells. I don't know of anything since. Everything now is flash or is, in some way computer painted and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, that show was done on real cells, and they got cheap in the second and third season. When I came on board, they started trying to slash the budgets for things. I don't think it was anything personal, but they'd done that first season of Pinky and the Brain, and then I had 52 weeks to get out 52 episodes. So, and it just and they were animated fairly cheaply. But that's my happiest experience in animation.
Pinky and the Brain?
Yeah.
Or just working under Spielberg on his shows?
Pinky and the Brain especially. But yeah, no, he was great. Yeah. And Silverman. I mean, Silverman was great to work for. But no, Pinky and the Brain just generally as a series was the most fun that I've ever had writing for animation. And Animaniacs as an ancillary thing. I liked doing some of those too.
I remember discovering Animaniacs. That was kind of a revelation.
Yeah. Well, you would have already been, 20-something when that came up.
Yeah.
Or in your late teens.
Yeah. And there you have it. That concludes my two-part interview with Scooby-Doo writer Charles M. Howell. I've really been enjoying getting a chance to talk to some of these creators who've worked on some of the older shows, and I'm really hoping that as I move on, I can snag more, because getting that perspective of working at the studio and kind of what was going on with the networks and the behind the stuff with putting together some of these shows that in retrospect I think fans might be a little bit hard on, not realizing what some of the behind the scenes stuff was. Talking to Charles about the directors who were the older directors who just didn't get the timing, I mean that just explains so much about how some of those older episodes play, and I'm definitely going to be thinking about that next time I'm sitting down and watching one of those shows. That may happen sooner than I expect, as in talking with Charles, he did express interest in doing a commentary if we can find the right episode to talk over, I suppose, is a more apropos way of saying it. If you guys have any suggestions, I've been looking back at some of the episodes that he's written, and I've been trying to find one or two that I can pitch to him, see which one he's kind of more comfortable talking about. So if you guys have any ideas of any episodes Charles has written that you would like to see a commentary on, by all means, send me a message. All the usual ways: Twitter, Facebook, the Gmail, scoobypodcast@gmail.com. Any help on that front would be appreciated, and especially getting, if there's an episode that you guys would like to hear, I'd rather you guys picked than me just kind of picking arbitrarily or on a whim or whatever, and you guys being like, oh, if only you did that episode. So yeah. And at this time, I'd also like to just extend a very hearty thank you to Charles for sitting down and talking to me, and to Conrad Terminus, who, as I mentioned last episode, helped set this up and suggested Charles as an interview subject It was just so much fun talking to Charles. He had a lot of stories and was just a really warm, gracious interview subject to talk to, and I'm pleased to consider Charles, as those who have gone before him, a friend of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. All the same places that you can send in your suggestions for commentary episodes. You can find me on Facebook, you can find me on WordPress, you can find me on Gmail, scoobypodcast@gmail.com, Twitter @ScoobyDooCast, and yeah, send your thoughts, your comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think. As for the next episode, I have Mike Feehan lined up. Mike was the artist on the Snagglepuss, Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, which I talked about with Mark Russell a few episodes ago, and it's coming out in trade, I believe, the week that this episode is being released. I originally wanted to release Mike's episode at the time I'm releasing this episode, but because of all the scheduling fails and whatnot, I'm probably going to release Mike's episode next week. But I did really want to just kind of have Mike's episodes around while that trade is still kind of hot off the presses and on store shelves. So you've heard me talking about the DC Hanna-Barbera stuff, how much I enjoy it. I know some of you have checked it out, which is fabulous. I'm so glad that the conversations that I've been having have actually been inspiring folks to go and check some of these out. So far, all I'm hearing is good things. You guys seem to be enjoying what is kind of out there, which is fabulous. And I had a great conversation with Mike, and I'm super looking forward to getting that interview out. And Mike also said he was willing to share some behind-the-scenes character designs and sketches and whatnot for the added value content, as I like to do with my DC Hanna-Barbera interview subjects. Got some other fun stuff down the road, which I'm not going to mention just yet because I haven't slotted in exactly where they're going to go, even though some of the interviews are done. But rest assured, moving on, we do have some great content, some great Scooby conversations, and otherwise. So, yeah, be sure to come back for next episode. Oh, and if you listen to the show off of iTunes while you're there, if you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing the show, basically, it just helps get the show kind of in the eyes and ears of people who might not know it's out there. And when they're entering in their search categories and whatnot, it brings the show kind of higher up. And it's just a way to support the show. Another great way to support the show is just if you're enjoying it, share it on your social media. If you think you know somebody who might enjoy one of the conversations that I'm having, if they're a fan of, comic books, or, Mark is a writer, or J.M. DeMatteis is a writer, or they're watching Stretch Armstrong and they're digging Victor Cook, or they're Phineas and Ferb fans, and we've got the John Colton Berry conversations. Just share them around. Word of mouth is the best. I was going to say medicine. Word of mouth is the best marketing promotion anybody could ask for, and you guys are so great and so supportive. Anything you can do is fabulous. So if you have any pod curious friends out there, send them my way. We'll see what we can fill their ears with. That sounded a little... I'm just going to move on from that. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, sorry for this being so late. Hoping from here on in I'm going to be on a bit more regular schedule, and looking forward to everything coming down the pipe. So, take care. I hope you enjoy the show, and remember...
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would've gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.